How are you doing today?
I'm all right. I'm okay. I'm not 100%. So if I sound like shit and I start speaking in tongues, then you'll know why. But I'm good to go.
Your new album is your first one since 2018. It
That's
sounds
right.
like it was kind of a happy accident and how it came together. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of a little bit more like I had when I first started doing music, I would just sort of record um, anytime I had an idea or whatever. And the first record I put out under the Landy moniker was like kind of an accumulation of all of those recordings. This wasn't that, but it was, in the subsequent three records I was very clearly going into either the studio or my home studio and, with a set amount of time to make a record. And this was a kind of a cross between between the two, which was sort of that, I kind of sort of found myself writing and beginning to demo again after really not doing that at all. I mean, not that I wasn't playing, but fiddling around, but had no real interest in time or bandwidth or space and that, had been a lot of moving around and moving cross country and having kids and all kinds of stuff. There just wasn't any bandwidth for any recording and writing in earnest, but I found myself sort of doing that around this time in 2023. And I was like, well, let me just see if I can do this with what limited supplies I have here. Because at the time I was, we were living where we live here, but in New York, but we still had a house in Los Angeles. And let me turn that off. Most of my stuff, studio stuff and, instruments and that kind of thing were, were in Los Angeles or they were in storage, drums and, effects units and all kinds of things. And so I was like, well, let me just see if I could do this with just like really basic equipment, and that'll kind of be the dogma. And that way I kind of won't get in over my head about it, and it'll just be what it is. But I don't really operate that way, and I'm way too into gear, and I'm way too into sort of learning a new, I guess, skill set. And so what ended up happening is I kind of was concurrently building a studio and writing a record. And it's funny, I look back at old pictures and videos of the last couple of years, and you can see, the room I'm in now sort of kind of progress and expand and get bigger and bigger. And, some of the songs that are on the record are from the, kind of initial stages of, kind of beginning to put that together. And then some are fully informed in a way by the fact that I had kind of more stuff and was more invested in making and recording, uh, engineering and mixing the whole thing myself, which I'd never done. I had played everything myself, and I had worked with one other um, um, partner, Andrew Lynch, on the last couple records, who was recording and mixing me. But this time I decided it would be kind of as much about learning how to, you know, do that myself entirely, although I've done it to some extent in the past, as much as it was about kind of making new music. So it was a sort of like creative slash tech symbiosis. It took basically 2 years before I felt like it was done, and maybe about a year and a half, I guess. And there you go. Yeah.
The album being the first one that you've done entirely from start to finish. Why did you feel you were ready for that kind of challenge?
I mean, I don't know that I did, but I just felt like it was something there wasn't there's no risk involved. And nobody cares. Nobody's waiting for the next Goldberg Sisters record. I mean, I'm not being self-effacing. It's just the truth. So like, I really had nothing to lose but money. And so I guess, I mean, I actually kind of felt like it may have balanced out financially. I mean, at least that's how I rationalize it because I wasn't paying anybody. But So I guess I thought, well, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, then who cares? You know.
How did that
I mean,
doing that?
to be clear, initially I did plan on recording the stuff, got some advice from my old pal, collaborator, Aaron Espinoza, who's got a studio, from Early Mart, who's got a studio in Los Angeles called The Ship, where I've, used to work a lot and record a lot, and we've done a lot of stuff, music together. And, I did call him and we did talk about the idea of me recording the stuff and the best way to do it. And then I was going to send it to him and he was going to mix it. But at some point, and I was, um, um, sort of thinking about doing the same with maybe some of the other instrumentation, or maybe I would start outsourcing some things. But, in the end, I just sort of felt like, well, again, why not just experiment and see if it's and I really do like I guess I always felt I stopped just short of doing it all. So why not kind of take it to, it was such a mystery in some ways to me, even though I had had various studio setups before and had done quite a bit of recording on my own. I didn't necessarily finish the process myself.
It sounds like it was very freeing with
Yeah.
opening up the
Yeah.
creative.
And there was no, I mean, it's a cross between brutally lonely and in my case, just because of my playing, really, I have to do a lot of comping. I'm not like an expert player by any means, but particularly of every single instrument. And so it always requires quite a lot of, um, you know, effort and work to just get just the tracks themselves, just to play the stuff. And then, of course, having to like worry about how it sounds and how it's recorded and compressed and equalized and all that. But at the same time, I kind of felt like there are oftentimes things I couldn't quite explain to people that felt, like in this case, like, the mixing and the engineering and was much more, was an extension of the music making, much in the same way that when I've made films in the past, I've ultimately ended up editing them, because physically editing them, myself, because I feel like, that's just a natural extension of the process.
Matching with different acting roles that kind of able to adapt on the fly
I mean,
and be
yeah,
ready for
maybe.
this
I
kind of
mean,
thing.
yeah, I don't know. I mean, certainly, you know, I definitely oftentimes feel like I'm playing at, doing certain things in life and, there's that adage, act first and your feelings will follow, or I don't know, act as if or whatever. And sometimes it's enough to bluff you through the process. I mean, I'm pleasantly surprised by the outcome. I don't think the stuff is sonically on the level of excuse me, of some of the better recordings of myself, but there are other things I think are better, in terms of just, whether it's performance or, maybe some stylistic things that, I didn't have a chance to nuance or the sort of space to work out and convey that I like, So yeah, it's kind of, it's a mixed bag.
What were some of the biggest challenges you had to overcome with taking everything?
I mean, a lot of it was just strictly technical. I mean, it was a lot of, I mean, we could talk about AI and music and what a scourge it's ultimately going to be. But in terms of the way I was using it, I mean, I was using it, to troubleshoot, you know, um, really specific, things in terms of connections on my board and stuff like that. So I found it to be pretty helpful. So, I mean, a lot of the really, the minutia of some of the technical, aspects of recording, were probably the most challenging. But I mean, there's also just a certain lack of objectivity. You don't really have any, you're not bouncing ideas off of anybody. In several instances, I re-recorded in almost entire songs from scratch, leaving only maybe the drum machine or something like that from the original recordings, because I took so long to record it, I would go back to the earlier songs and think that they, weren't really on par with whatever I was currently recording, probably because I had learned a little bit more about how to get the sounds that I wanted and that kind of thing. And, or, my ears were fresh, that kind of thing. So, yeah, it's a very solitary sort of wilderness like experience, but like I said, it also could be very freeing and there aren't, the only real restraints were like, when are my kids going to get home and start bugging me, kind of thing, which is definitely a restraint, but it's not quite the same as, your time is up, you owe us another $1,000 or whatever.
What's it been like having your own studio now?
I mean, it's great. I mean, a lot of I ended up selling quite a some of the stuff after I was done recording because I was like, I don't know that I will be using this stuff anytime soon, and I want to fund the making of the actual record, the vinyl, which is expensive, and all the stuff that goes into sort of putting the physical record out into the world. But I, far from disassembled everything. I mean, I'm looking at this pretty awesome, sort of board and chain I put together, largely around this Cranbourne Audio, uh, 500, these 500 decks, three 500 decks, and then some more, kind of, classic rack mounted vintage gear and stuff. But anyway, yeah, it's great. I mean, I have a friend's daughter who's an incredibly talented musician. She sings on one of my songs called Stuck With Me. And she's insanely talented person. I'm sure at some point we will be hearing from. I mean, she's making records now, but off to college. And she had asked to come by and record. Well, she lives in Maine, but um, and so, the opportunity to do something with somebody else, and record them is now, much more, of a realistic, proposition, than when I just had, you know, just a couple of USB interfaces or whatever.
Did you seek out advice from others like Aaron for how to put together your studio?
Yeah, early on, I definitely did. I mean, it started out with something simple. I was like, just give me the best, like, whatever, give me the best compressor, or like, what's your favorite 500 compressor or whatever. But, it kind of began that way, and I thought I would just have like kind of one little chain, one pat, like a compressor, like an EQ, or a single, or a single unit that had, sort of all three. But uh, but in the end, because I ended up recording drums, suddenly it really had to expand, and so that's when I got, and that's when it was really good timing because this Cranbourne audio stuff had really, I think, changed the game, and um, made this stuff kind of affordable, and the quality is really, really good. I mean, I used some other 500 components, but it made it so, you could buy a lot of ins and outs, and, really, and really properly, record, drums, for instance. But yeah, I would, yeah, there was definitely like a text thread with Aaron where I was like, what about this? What about that? What about this? What about this mic? What's your favorite ribbon mic? And, that kind of thing.
Sounds like he really helped boost your confidence to that you were ready
Well,
for.
yeah. Well, he definitely boosted my confidence in terms of spending. But yeah, I mean, I'm sure had I been in Los Angeles, I probably just would have worked with him. But yeah.
Imagine it's nice having your own studio that you can don't have to travel to
Yeah,
different
yeah. I
places.
mean, it's like all stuff that's become, kind of home based. I mean, I remember, when I first got, in editing, I edited my last feature at home, And, you know, when I began making movies as a filmmaker, not as an actor, but I mean, it was around the same time in the 90s, you know, you had to go to this, you had to go to a facility and, having an Avid was just completely unheard of. It was hundreds of thousands of dollars and tons of equipment, and blah, blah, blah. The benefit of that, of course, is that, you can walk away from it and you probably should. And, so when I began, I remember editing at home, and then recording at home, to some degree in my old house. The last couple records, there's no inherent limitation. And so, you can kind of go down a rabbit hole, but at the same time, it can be very liberating too.
You originally picked the Goldberg Sisters as a way to stand out from the crowd and create kind of a musical persona. How do you think this album most fully shows what your artistic vision for the project?
Um, well, I don't know. I mean, I feel like, it definitely like sounds like stuff I've done, like for sure. Particularly the things that I'm releasing as singles, I guess, which were a little more kind of linear songs. But then there's some other stuff on here that was, that I kind of constructed in a way that um, I've done a little bit in the past, but was putting more emphasis on here, which was sort of starting with samples, um, sometimes using, just a sampler, or a sequencer, and essentially, outputting that, into Pro Tools, and then, kind of backing my way into it, backing a song into it that way, sort of reverse engineering it, I guess. I mean, there's a million ways to write a song, and certainly this is not not innovative. But for me, I think the fact that the record is somewhat evenly divided between songs I sat down and like wrote, like at a piano or with the guitar, and ones that that were kind of written just as sequences or loops, and then constructed melodies on top of that. I think it's a little more balanced in that way than some of the other records I've done.
The album's first single, Our Kind of Love, is about the how complex love is in modern days with technology and that kind of stuff. Can you talk a little bit about your inspiration writing that one? And
Yeah, I mean, I had just had a loop that I had made, um, and I was singing over it, Our Kind of Love. Sometimes, you sing nonsense lyrics, or I always sing nonsense lyrics, or whatever comes to my mind first. And sometimes you keep them, and sometimes you don't. Um, I mean, the song Stuck With Me on the record is a perfect example. It was used to be called Fuck With Me and wasn't quite making a lot of sense. And then, I sort of rewrote the song, kind of, there's a generative process, I guess, to any kind of writing, and, sort of self-generative process. And, with this, it was like, um, I don't know, I think I just started demoing it and singing the lyrics. Sometimes I'll just sing the lyrics directly into the, like a scratch track of vocals. And sometimes I just end up keeping them. Or I am like, oh, that's what the song's about. I mean, I didn't know what it was about until I began singing it. And then, I was like, oh, it's about, the sort of presentation of, kind of love on the, in social media, or presentation on social media of, your, you know, supposed, kind of happiness or whatever. And that's a theme that kept kind of popping up. It was the first song I wrote or recorded for this. And again, it was a kind of simple song, and it was a kind of my go-to kind of chord progression. There wasn't anything particularly innovative about it, but it did end up inspiring me to continue to write and record. And it did seem to have an impact on kind of some of the thematic issues of the record, which there is this recurring theme of, I guess technology, or, you know, social media or presentation. There's a song that's kind of blatantly about it called, well, it's either called content or content. Um, it's, the homonym, it's spelled, the same way. And and that one is, very clearly about that subject. But yeah, it did kind of, I mean, for a while I kind of thought, well, that's going to be the overarching theme of the record. But the more I wrote, the more it ended up being kind of as much about some, random personal things and my childhood, and that's what the title of the record is really a reference to. So.
I imagine it's been kind of a challenging trying to deal with AI and
Yeah, I mean, I'm not getting into that stuff. I mean, AI, like but when I was making this, AI seemed like, I mean, like I said, it's like having an engineering buddy. I had no idea that, just like a few months there would be, deep fakes that were essentially unrecognizable you know, um, as AI and that kind of thing. But yeah, I mean, I'm just more talking about the sort of, you know, the this just this idea of persona and sort of presentation on the internet.
create in songs from guitar loops. Why do you think it's worked so well for you?
It's just a way of recording by yourself. It's just I mean, it's or writing by yourself. It's just, I think, if I had a band, I'd be doing that. In fact, when I've tried to incorporate loop stuff with bands, it's becomes a whole other thing. And I've had some success to zero success doing that in the past. It's just a way of recording on the fly and layering sounds, which I love. And, sometimes you get ideas that I don't think you would get or I would get simply by playing out chords, progressions, um, I love the sound of it. And so sometimes I'll like, import the actual loop itself, but generally it's just a songwriting tool. It's just like having a band member, I guess.
Is that something that you more or less picked up by yourself, or was there others that you kind of emulate?
Yeah, I think like I started using one like when did I got this first like Boss loop pedal back in 2002 or something like that, or three or two or around there. And yeah, I don't know why I got it. I can't remember the situation, but I know it was another situation where I had just moved back from New York to LA. I don't know. Maybe I don't know. But I do remember that I was like, wow, this is such a great sound. And, and it, I get to do this. I guess it reminded me of, because I recorded a lot on 4 tracks for years. So at the time, it was before I had, that's what it was. I didn't have Pro Tools. It was like before I got an M-Box. Um, and I was still using 4 tracks. And I guess it must have reminded me of using a 4 track because I could reverse stuff and, layer it, and it had a kind of a tape-ish sort of quality to it. And, some of those loops went right into this movie I did called I Love Your Work. I mean, they're literally in there. Other ones, yeah, it became song ideas. And sometimes I would just use it, playing live if I needed to sort of thicken things out or whatever. But yeah, I wasn't aware of, like, I know people would, have been using those line six, delays loopers for a while, and I didn't know about. I don't know. Yeah, I wish I could remember exactly what inspired me to get it, but and start using it. But I do know that it seemed to like bridge the gap between 4 track recordings and like an M box, basically.
Were, was there were there others that were using those type of loops that kind of got you into that direction?
I don't think I knew that. I mean, I think I sort of found out later, by looking at people's boards. I was like, oh, they must have been. I mean, there was a band that I knew that um at the time called Auto Lux, and the lead guitar player was layering a lot of stuff live, so you'd hear them, and it was this kind of like, cacophony, almost to sort of My Bloody Valentine sort of, layering of guitars. And I think that's the first time I became aware of someone using it in a live setting. But, I was already just doing it, as a home recording device, basically.
The album's title track is about going back to your old home and seeing the colorful window. You talked a little bit about writing that one and the inspiration.
Yeah, I mean, I wrote this song for about kind of my mom or about growing up with my mom or one specific memory called The Spirit of 76. And then separately, I had this thing that I did on something. Oh, I sold it. But a sampler where I had sort of jammed on top of the sample and recorded it, and I liked it a lot, and I put some drums on it, but I really didn't know what the song was. And there wasn't much to it as a song. It was like just a two-chord progression. In fact, that's probably one of the most challenging things on the record because it's all dynamics and arrangement because there's really no inherent song. Not that there aren't two-chord songs, but I mean, it just doesn't go anywhere. There's no, it doesn't change on a chorus. There's no bridge. And so it all had to be sort of worked out. And I thought, well, it'll just be an instrumental track or something. But then I started singing in the car to it, and the first thing out of my mouth was "When the Ships of My Dreams Return," which is this, um, yeah, it was written on this window, stained glass window in on the staircase of my childhood house where I lived with my mom. And some years ago, I was allowed back in the house because I saw somebody out front, and I drove by and I saw somebody out front, and I asked them if I could look inside. I hadn't been in there since I was 13, and she let me. She was not the owner. She was actually the interior designer, and the whole house was empty at the time because they were redecorating or something. So she snuck me in, and I saw the window, and the struck me was that I always thought that the window had said, in my memories, that it said, "And the ship sails on," or something. That's what I always remembered. But it said, "When the ships of my dreams return," which I thought, wow, that's kind of profound because this house had always haunted me. I dreamt about it and had dreams that took place in it to this day, really. And I don't mean haunted in a bad way, although some of the dreams are kind of eerie. But and so yeah, I just kind of started singing along with it, this kind of sample, and so sort of wrote a song around that window, that hallway, that house, that time, that period of my life, and it sort of bookends the record because it opens with The Spirit of 76 and closes with When the Ships of My Dreams Return, which is, the first few stanzas are the same as The Spirit of 76, but it's a markedly different tone. And then it sort of segs into a set of new lyrics and verses. But yeah, it felt like it's kind of my favorite really, on the record because it has a kind of a hallucinatory quality that I feel like it's the closest to capturing the mood of what I was kind of trying to convey, as well as I've experienced when I kind of think about that period and that time, and how memory and dreams, sort of, affect your recollections. But yeah, and then I ended up putting it on, having this amazing Black Velvet artist named Gil Corral, and he painted from a picture I took when I was in the house that day. He painted the window on black velvet, and it became really what the record was um, kind of centered around in a way.
Songs of the song title kind of felt like it was representative of the whole.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's like a concept record, but there are elements of it being, you know, songs being conceptually linked. I think it's sort of, there's probably three categories of songs. Songs about sort of that, that period of my life, songs about, relationships and the presentations of relationships and I guess there's a certain amount of, and then songs about mortality. I think there's quite a few of those.
Sonically, it sounds like you experimented a little bit more with trying to get some different. Can you talk a little bit about your goals for the album and why Steely Dan was a kind of an inspiration?
Well, I mean, my joke is that I have Steely Dan taste, but a pure budget. But uh, well, actually, that's not the joke. The joke is that I have a Steely Dan taste, but an autodidact's ability really is, but it's kind of clunkier. So I mean, there's very little in the way of Steely Dan on this. It's just that, sometimes I look to them as references for, you know, kind of certain arrangements or drum sounds or whatever. I'm like, I'm very into like, just in general, just sort of 70s kind of drum sounds and stuff. But in the end, and what I end up sounding like is just what your goal is and what you and how it ends up being filtered through your own abilities or taste or whatever are two very different things. But it's funny to consider how much Steely Dan I was listening to while I was recording this because I don't think you'll hear any of that in there, even though technically I do believe I did use Steely Dan snare to pad one of my snares on one of the songs, but other than that, I don't think you'd notice.
Imagine that there's a balance with trying to decide how minimal or really ambitious, complex sound. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, I always sort of like the demos better and the more minimal iterations of them better, but for some reason I can't stop there. Either because I don't trust my playing or I'm just like the actual act of creating sounds that, you know, weren't there or become have a generative kind of quality to them. I mean, I'm also very into like ambient music and stuff, and I'm into, you know, very heavily textured music. But I also, one of the things that, I'm always super impressed by is like Spoon, I guess you could argue a lot of their songs might have a similar quality, but that they always manage to, have like it's very clear how into the studio and into the sound they are, and I always think they exercise a great deal of restraint. So when there's a kind of an unusual sound or a sort of anomalistic artifact sort of passes through the song, it seems like it's always, it's really emphatic, um and it's surprising, the problem when you're kind of overly obsessed with creating those sounds is that you can end up piling them on to such an extent that they stop becoming interesting or they don't really rise to the surface. And I struggle with that a bit, and certainly with mixing, I really tried to carve out stuff in such a way that your ears wouldn't become too overwhelmed. But it's a challenge because I really do like texturing stuff and creating layers and things.
the song at leisure features some tongue-in-cheek lyrics
Yeah.
that sounds like your wife kind of helped with. Can you talk
Well,
a little
yeah,
bit?
I mean, well, I don't know. She just came into the room, studio, whatever you want to call it, downstairs, and was, I think, off to go play tennis or just come back from playing tennis. It was in athleisure, and I don't know, we made a joke about how it would, something about how we couldn't believe there wasn't a song about athleisure, like a summer banger called athleisure. And I started singing it in the car with the kids, and the kids were singing along, and my friends were singing along. And then I tried to sort of, and I never do that. I don't like sing something and try and play it because I'm really not that good of a musician to be able to sort of play by ear that way. But so I tried to sort of retrofit it so that it, anyway, I basically came up with something similar on the guitar and then played it, and it had more of a kind of a, I don't know, it was sounded more, it's hardly a, well, it's definitely kind of a joke, but also kind of cool. And so I was like, well, I don't know, I'll just keep going. And I did. And then one thing led to another, and it was just another song on the record, which really, in many ways, is fully out of place on it. But I don't know. It was part of the whole process, so it seemed in that regard. And again, there were some elements of it having some thematic similarity. I mean, it's very sort of just, you know, much about, presentation again. But yeah, there's nothing deep about it. It's just about the rise of athleisure.
It started out with Crocs and socks, and then she went out for a walk at leisure. She didn't mind being alone, but she was sick of staying home at leisure. 2020 came and went, just like the cash that she spent on at leisure. Now she goes straight from the gym to having drinks with Jim. She wears athleisure.
And also I used, like a really classic sort of like, four on the floor, sort of dance drum machine, beat, which, usually I don't do that. But it was fun to kind of toy with it.
And I think that you reference Chapel Roan.
Yeah, it just rhymed, and she was popular and had a summer banger, so I don't know.
Hopefully you shall get a chance to listen.
Oh yeah,
Listen
yeah, who
when it
knows?
comes out.
Yeah, you never know. Maybe if she avidly Googles herself.
What does it mean to be able to feature your family more and more to your music?
Oh, I mean, it's great. I mean, my wife and I had always done stuff together, and she was always playing violin and singing and stuff. Uh, on this one, she just sings a bit, but yeah, my kids can kind of sing now, so and it made sense that they were on this. My now 7-year-old was 6 when I was singing about being 6 and the sort of outro of the Spirit of 76. So yeah, I mean, there's definitely like a nice familial quality to that. And the music video I'm making now for this next single called The Great Resignation, also features a bunch of, excuse me, Super 8 of them. So yeah, I mean, everything we do is a kind of family affair here. We're all we all like to make stuff here.
Then you got to also work with the Chopin sisters.
Chapin Sisters. Well, they're old friends of my wife, and they live right near us. And in some ways, they're partly responsible for why we moved to where we moved. When I got this job out in New York, and I needed to be near New Jersey, so we moved to this particular area, which was New Jersey adjacent, and it happened to be, I was somewhat inspired by actually seeing Lily Chapin's house has this incredible 70s, somewhat notable 70s recording studio that was, there when they bought it, obviously, and where they record. And anyway, yeah, they're just like, Roxanne used to play with them. They're old friends, and they're, brilliant singer-songwriters, and because the song itself is about this kind of living where we live in part, that just fully made sense to ask them if they would record some vocals on some backing vocals, and then they're also heavily featured in the music video for it. So yeah.
In addition to releasing your own music. You have a wealth of notable acting, writing, and directing experiences. You know, what ways do you think those experiences have shaped how you approach and view music?
I don't know. I mean, I feel like it's somewhat compartmentalized, when I'm doing one thing, that's what I'm doing. When I'm doing another thing, that's what I'm doing, I guess. But I mean, to me it's all part of just like the creative project of living, some people are exceptionally good at piano and that's how they express themselves. I'm a little tiny bit good. I should say I'm very interested in a lot of different things, and that's how I express myself. And, certainly one thing is how I made my living. I definitely have not made my living making movies, so I think making music and making films are more akin than acting, which is very much the means by which I could even afford to do this kind of thing and take the time to do it. I don't know how the hell anybody is surviving, particularly these days, making music. But um, I I mean, yeah, I think they're just all different sort of just kind of creative, just different, segments of the same sort of ambition to express myself.
Imagine it's fulfilling to be able to express yourself in a variety of ways in different mediums.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, I mean, yeah, it feels like a necessary thing. Like yeah, I don't know how to be, I guess, any other way.
Are there any people that you looked up to growing up that kind of fostered that kind of mindset to
Um, Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, David Lynch was, a huge hero of mine and many, and he was a guy who I thought, expressed himself obviously through film and through sound, um, through music, through furniture making, photography, um, and I don't know that I would. Again, it's not like, oh, I want to be like this person. They're doing that. I think you either are that person or you're not that person. But certainly. His work, certainly inspired me a great deal.
as an actor, what do you enjoy most about being able to jump between big and small roles?
Uh, I don't, I would be lying if I told you I had any control over that. I mean, occasionally I do things as favors, but more often than not, I do whatever is I can get a job doing. So if that happens to be a bigger role, then great. If it's a smaller role, then okay. A bigger role in a smaller movie might be more creatively fulfilling. A smaller role in a bigger movie might be more financially fulfilling. But anybody sub, Brad Pitt level basically is just trying to get a job. If they tell you otherwise, they're sort of full of shit, I think.
Imagine the variety kind of has helped make you more well-rounded.
Yeah, I mean, I always say like my best acting was in high school because it was before I was typecast, and so you could kind of play anything you wanted essentially, or anything you were good at. And if you were an actor, if you were an actor in high school, then, well, anyway, you know, for instance, I'm sure I would not be necessarily hired to play whatever, character in Our Town I was hired. I mean, I was cast as, in the 11th grade. Now, because, I think most actors' versatility is sadly, left on the audition room floor, and so the casting office floor, I guess, would be the better quote. But yeah, certainly I definitely value the opportunity I have had to play. I think a fairly decent variety of roles, and it's always um, more exciting and fulfilling than simply repeating yourself for a paycheck. Yeah.
Two of your big early roles were Dazed and Confused and Saving Private Ryan. how did those experiences kind of helpful in your growth as a actor?
I mean, you know, Dazed was a huge, seminal experience for everybody involved. I mean, I don't know, didn't necessarily affect my career at the time in any notable way. I mean, life went back to normal when we got back from Austin, but for most of us. But the experience of doing that, is and doing Saving Private Ryan and doing, anything that's sort of had a big cultural impact, but also was, an intense and collaborative experience is always, it's always great. There's you know, and and to have been involved in things that, you're proud to have been involved in, obviously is better than than being totally ashamed. I don't happen to think my best work is in either of those movies, but I am certainly proud to have contributed to them.
In addition to the new album, what are you most looking forward to in the year ahead?
And in terms of the record, or
The record or other projects that you have?
oh God, I mean, I'm just looking forward to getting out of 2025 alive, honestly. That's been my goal. It's just been such a fucking miserable, horrifying year. That not that I believe that the calendar is some sort of, um, actual, you know, meaningful delineation, but it may prove as a palate cleanser, I hope. Yeah, I mean, I'm writing a book. I would love to finish it, get it out there. And I'd love for people to hear this record and then get some kind of job that helps pay for all my for for writing a book and making a record.
Are you planning to play any shows in support of the film?
No, I mean, not really. No. I don't have a band. Um, I don't love playing. I mean, I have played in sort of stripped down solo-esque versions of um the Goldberg Sisters. I think the best thing I ever did was a video where I played with my sister, and it's the two of us um playing a song from the last record. It's on YouTube. Um, because in a way it was the purest expression of, of what really goes on. But yeah, I mean, I've done it in the past where I put whole bands together and that kind of thing. And I think it was really more when I felt like I needed to do it or one was supposed to do it. And I just feel like the cost benefit between my ability to sort of bandwidth and the anxiety that it causes me and like the payoff is just not worth it. Uh, I really think of myself as someone who like records music. I don't think of myself as a live musician.
What are some artists and songs that you've been really into about?
Um, I'm been really, really, really heavily into Father John Misty's work, which in a way I kind of came to sort of late, I guess. Or maybe I was resistant to in some way. But yeah, I think what he's doing on his records is really magnificent. I love his writing, his songwriting, I love his production. My Midlake, I've always been a huge fan of both iterations of it, and I'm, pals, sort of internet pals with them, with a couple of the guys. And I love their last record that they just put out is really beautiful. Um, Andy Schaaf, I really like a lot, and been listening to a lot recently. There's a song on the record that's about Elliott Smith. It's about listening to Elliott Smith, Sparkle Horse, and well, the Silver Jeweler, David Berman, called, what's it called? Driving with Elliot, Mark, and David on the PIP in December, Palisades Interstate Parkway, which is really about, you know, my kind of inability to listen to those guys, or sort. I mean, you know, I was always deeply moved. I mean, you know, Elliott Smith and particularly and Mark Linkus were two of my favorite musicians, and when they died, it, you know, really affected me, and it was really hard for me to listen to their music. David Berman had just come out with a record when he died, and I couldn't stop listening to that record. And there was a period where I was driving back and forth to work, which was far from where I live now, like an hour away, and you know, I decided to go all in and listen to all of these guys, and it was just sort of like being visited, you know. Anyway, that's what that song's about. But yeah, sadly, I'm kind of not like much of a new music guy. I kind of just listen to the stuff that I already like. I mean, I think that happens more and more maybe as you get older. I don't know. You know, I also listen to a lot of jazz, so I'm always listening to Bill Evans constantly. Yeah. Oh, and Ryan Eno.
Do you have a dream musical
Oh,
collaborator?
who's my dream music? I don't know. Years ago, I reached out to Colleen, who's I guess you would call her an ambient musician. I don't know exactly. French musician, when I was in France promoting a few records ago. And she politely turned me down. But yeah, she does incredible work with sampling and loops and synths and just beautiful, beautiful work. I worked with one of my favorite musicians of like all time, Bridget St. John. She sang on my last record, and honestly, I don't know that I could beat that. I mean, she's up there for me with Karen Dalton and Nick Drake, you know. So I kind of, and then I also worked with Stephen Drozd on a bunch of stuff, you know. So I kind of like, I'm already pretty spoiled, I think.
Thanks for taking time to talk to me. Really enjoyed going to chat with you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you for taking the time. I really do appreciate it.